Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Street Talk, which is brought to you by the Urban Violence Research Network. Today, we're going to talk about one of Italy's main mafias, one of Italy's main criminal groups, the Ndrangheta, the Calabrian Mafia. So this mafia, you may have heard of it recently because it recently made the headlines, and actually pretty interestingly made the headlines perhaps more internationally than in Italy itself, for a maxi trial that started on January the 13th, and that is one of the largest trials ever to take place in Italy against an organized criminal group. So to speak about this topic, actually in Street Talk's second ever all-Italian lineup, we have a great guest, which is Dr. Anna Sergi, who is a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Essex. So just as a short introduction, Anna holds a PhD in sociology from Essex and a degree in law from the University of Bologna, which actually is also my alma mater. So we have a couple of things in common, I guess. She is chair of the Early Career Researchers Network of the British Society of Criminology. And she has written extensively, so please go check her literature, like her publications, because there's a lot of very interesting things. I can't recommend it enough. She has written extensively about the Calabrian Ndrangheta, of course, its Australian offshoot, as well as comparative criminal law, and also organized crime and criminal activity in seaports. So Anna, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Andrea. And actually, we also share King's College.
Of course.
I did my master at King's. Yes. So that's, you know, even more. Italians stick together, apparently, somehow. We all have the same channels. So thank you for having me. It's a really interesting project. I look forward to the conversation. So How do we start?
Well, I think we start from the basics. So can you please explain what is the Ndrangheta? Because our audience may know already about, Italian mafias, but they may not know perhaps the differences between the Sicilian Mafia, the Calabrian Mafia. So just explain what is the Ndrangheta.
Okay, so I'll do two things briefly. One thing is, Calabrian Mafia, the region of Calabria is the one at the very end of the Italian peninsula, is the toe of the peninsula, facing Sicily, and it's Italy's poorest region. So in this wonderful, how can I put it, very used parallelism between poverty and organized crime, which is very, very problematic to just assume, as it has developed one of Italy's most, today's wealthiest mafia, strangely enough, wealthiest in the poorest region. And it is today the focus of pretty much all law enforcement activities throughout the peninsula. So its power has been around for pretty much as long as the Sicilian Mafia. They are sisters or cousins, as you want to call them, but their behavior and their reach has been just properly understood in the past 20, 30 years for a number of reasons that are more historical than criminological. They have to do with the particular strategy of the Sicilian Mafia during the 90s to be more violent and very much more in the spotlight, and in reaching out to the political sphere way more than Ndrangheta did seem to do at the time, but this is also part of the new discoveries that might not be true. And obviously because the Italian legislation at the beginning was a little bit more vague, a little bit more fumous. So long story short, today the Ndrangheta is considered the strongest mafia, the most complicated mafia to study, ever-changing, constantly dynamic, and more importantly, the most powerful, let's say powerful, very, very critically so, because it's been found to travel quite a lot. So you find it in many different countries. So the mobility of the Calabrian Mafia has completely revamped a section of studies on the topic, which had remained a little bit stuck on Sicily and America. And now it has a whole new flavor with the substituting the Sicilians with the Calabrians and seeing what do they do elsewhere. But then I can give you probably a better definition of the Ndrangheta, which is not my definition. It's a definition of a collaboratore di giustizia, a witness of the state, Antonino Fiume, who gave the following definition of the Ndrangheta, which I think could help us understand. And talks about the 'Ndrangheta, I'm reading, so that's why I have my, sorry about that. The 'Ndrangheta is like a train with many carriages. Every carriage has its own head, kind of thing. And then there is the head of the train, even if this is always a temporary figure. Let's say there is a train that goes locally, but then there is another train parallel to this one, which goes much faster, and on which not everyone can jump in. Only the people who are quite rich and quite well off can get on the faster train. And on top of this train, there are also people who travel by plane. And they are not known to the people on the trains at all, but they know who is on the train. And essentially they kind of decide sometimes what happens to some of the trains. And sometimes they can also derail the train. So I don't know what you understand from that, but that's pretty much the confused typology that basically says that 'Ndrangheta is not a hierarchical mafia. It's an organization that appears unitary only when you look from above. When you look from below, it doesn't look like a unitary structure. Mm-hmm. So everyone kind of does their own thing, but then there are some people more important than others, but the people from below don't know who these are. So it's a very interesting power structure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is like a fascinating metaphor. Like, I guess it really speaks to the secrecy and to the existence of different levels. And it seems that with different levels, of course, comes different power, maybe even different like social class, like belonging to different social class. So that's almost chilling in a way.
It is. I mean, you find these pearls in some of the investigation materials. It's like, well, I couldn't have said it any better. Yeah. So thank you. So great. Yeah, I'm gonna use it all the time. Yeah.
One of the advantages of having these witnesses, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talking about these witnesses and talking, I guess, about the issue of the different levels of 'Ndrangheta. I guess this also plays a part in the current trial that is going on. So I mentioned it at the very start, but can you please talk a little bit, why this trial now, this trial has like hundreds of people who are being prosecuted. What is the issue at stake? And is this going to be like a major turning point in the fight against 'Ndrangheta?
Okay, so I'm gonna be playing devil's advocate here, or 'Ndrangheta's advocate, I'm not sure. So this trial, which is called the Rinascita Scott, is a trial from the prosecutor of Catanzaro. Catanzaro is one of the two anti-mafia prosecutors' office in Calabria, the other one, the main one being Reggio Calabria. But Catanzaro is quite a large one, and is headed by a chief prosecutor who is particularly well known for being very vocal about the state's need to step up in the fight against 'Ndrangheta, and more importantly, in the resourcing of the offices against 'Ndrangheta. So this trial comes within this picture. And within this picture, you have an investigation that has been built since 2017 on the back of several other trials. So they are not reinventing any wheels here. They are concluding certain streams of investigation that have been boiling up for years in the province. It has on trial 355 people, started with 420, but not everyone was eventually confirmed. The most important thing about this trial is actually not even the amount of people, but the amount of witnesses, because you have about 900 people who are going to be heard. And among these, 58 are witnesses of the prosecution. So pentiti, as we call them, which is very unusual for the 'Ndrangheta to have that. Some of the people involved in this trial are particularly interesting. And we can discuss how interesting they are, but two things to clarify. The 'Ndrangheta has provinces, so this trial only relates to one province, which is not the main one, so it's the province of Vibo Valencia, and in particular to the clans of that province, which historically have been very uneven in the way they handle power. So there are very, very strong clans and very, very kind of minor ones. So the ones that are on trial are the big ones. These are the clans that are mostly involved in cocaine trafficking. These are the ones who are mostly violent, actually, have been violent in very gruesome ways. Even maybe didn't make the news as much as the trial, but a few weeks before the trial, there was a case about the same clan and feeding of a woman to pigs. So, wow. You know, they are really violent in the strong sense of violence. So some people are in these clans are on trial, and more importantly, some people close to these clans who are who were former deputies, one of the secretaries of the regional secretary of the Forza Italia party, who had been obviously an elected politician. He was a lawyer. He still is, I guess. I'm not quite sure what his story is going to be. He's allegedly supporting the mafia boss of this area. So very high-end kind of friendships here. Very instrumental friendships, because obviously it's all about what did the clan do for these people, for the so-called white collars, as we call them in Italy, and what did the white collars do for the clans. So it's obviously the trafficking of favors goes both ways. Mm-hmm. So this is the important thing about the Ndrangheta trial now. But I guess, unfortunately, the reasons why it made the news is because of the sheer amount of people on trial. It's really a lot of people on trial. And this is a specific political choice. This is a political in the sense of policy of justice choice. There's a choice it didn't have to be this big. It was intentionally this big because the trial was meant to be telling a story. The story being, we are trying to tell a narrative that shows how serious this problem is, how much the state needs to focus on this, and more importantly, with the power of such numbers, we can, I wouldn't say put up a show, but we can attract attention enough that protects us. Because going on trial with such caliber of mafiosi is a risk. If there is TV, if everyone watches it, if the state has to pay attention, then it's a little bit less risky. So there are, conditional issues. It's a very difficult trial, and many people are having doubts on how well it's gonna go. But I guess it tells us more about the ways the anti-mafia laws are flexible than it tells us about the Ndrangheta, because at the end of the day, even if everyone was convicted, I have my doubts that it's going to be the end of the Ndrangheta, sure. In a way. So maybe it's already been probably quite a blow, but let's not forget, and that's the last thing I'm going to say on this, that the main guy on trial, Luigi Mancuso, he was a 66-year-old man who spent 20 years of his life in prison for mafia crimes already. He got out in 2012 and got back in 2019. He ruled from prison, very easily so. So, and he has a charisma and power in the Ndrangheta that very few people have. So whether he's in prison or outside of prison, it might not make such a big difference.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot of unpacking in what we watched.
I know. Sorry, I tried to be clear, but it's very complicated.
You were very clear, and actually reminded me of a few examples. Like when I'm studying Rio de Janeiro, I sometimes found there was an example of such as like sweeping, kind of a sweeping wave of arrests against militias, which in Rio de Janeiro are kind of like a local mafia, because they do have a protection racket, and the local police, of course, arrested 120 I think people. They were conducted also by very active prosecutors who wanted to draw attention on the militias, and wanted to draw also to make them feel the heat, of course, of prosecution. But then at the end, 100 I think of those people were just discharged in a few weeks, because there was not they just caught a bunch of them at a party. So actually, a lot of them. So in this case, it was more negative possibly.
Well, I guess we'll have mixed results. I think some cases look stronger than others, but obviously when you have such a law that allows you to put everything together, it's bound to have some, complications on the way. So we'll see how it goes. But I guess the important thing is to look from above and zoom into the trial. The trial does not exist in a vacuum. It, as I said, it builds on things that were already happening for the past 10 years. No anti-mafia investigation happens in a vacuum. So this trial has links with other 3 trials at the very least, one of which was in 2003, which was the first trial against the clan, the main clan. Then there was another trial, there are the 2 trials, sorry, which are currently still before the courts, which are in Reggio Calabria instead, to which this trial connects through the, the kind of the power structure of the Ndrangheta, more generally speaking, the people who take the planes in the metaphor. So there are connections between this trial and those other 2 trials. So looking at it just in a sort of a vacuum does not give it just leaves you with, oh, there are lots of people on trial, which is not the whole story.
Of course. And there are a couple of things that strike me about this process. Just maybe to finish with Rinascita Scott, and then maybe we can move like to the bigger picture with the other trials.
Yeah.
And maybe the numbers, maybe like the sheer numbers may not be like a good indication, as we said, but then it seems like the number of pentiti, the number of like collaborators seems like a striking factor. And you said that normally it's more difficult, and tell me if I'm mistaken, for Ndrangheta to have these kind of collaborators with justice than with other mafias. So can you tell us a little bit more if this is actually like maybe like one of the most striking parts of this trial, and why is it that in pentiti are harder to come by as far as Ndrangheta is concerned?
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna sound like my grandmother in a mafia form, I guess. So these mafiosis on trial, the clans, are kind of the new clans. So they are not the most honorable clans in that sense. So they're kind of these young people who don't know how to do mafia kind of thing. So that's if you compare it to the older ones. But without jokes, some of the pentiti, let's call them pentiti, some of the people who are witnesses of the prosecution at this stage are not that big fishes. So there are people who kind of were promised to get out sort of unscratched and took the small way. But as we said, these are likely people who sit in the local carriage of the train. However, there are some notable distinctions here. And one of which is basically one of the guys who is a pentito is Emanuele Mancuso. Emanuele is is going to testify against his uncle Luigi, and not only Luigi is the boss of the area and one of the most important people in the Ndrangheta ever, but more importantly, Emanuele was supposed to take over. So the fact that he left and is such a high level. It has to do, and we can only analytically speculate here because obviously we don't know what's going on in his heart, has to do with, on one side, the worry that he had about the violence of this whole mafia affair. He's a 36-year-old guy, so he's our age kind of thing. He studied, he went to study in Milan, I believe, and then came back. He did start collaborating with the mafia side of the business. He was supposed to take over because he's the son of the other boss of the family. So he's supposed to be the executive director while his uncle was in prison. But eventually he probably just couldn't take it. So he decided to sort of do this and lose his face, as we say in Italy, by breaking up completely with his family, which is quite a strong thing. And this goes to your second question. The reasons why we don't see this is because the Ndrangheta is a family stuff. There is no one else but family. So it shouldn't surprise that obviously going against the family, even when they have done the most heinous things, comes with an awful lot of consequences that not many can take, especially if you don't trust the state to protect you in a way that is, viable. There are no middle ways here. There are no middle grounds. If you get out, you get out, and you're out forever. But more importantly, it's not a safe thing to rely on the state, especially if you were told from day one of your life that the state is your enemy. So it's a really difficult process. That's why we see very less. So that's why someone like Emanuele Mancuso has been a kind of a unique thing, but it has to do probably more with the kind of clans that these clans specifically is. This is the most, the quickest growing clan ever. They were born in the 70s, 80s, and they already in the 90s were at the top and the top of the top. So they had a very quick, and there are many reasons for that, including their ability to enter very soon in the cocaine trade, their ability to make connections with other clans, with protectors, and more importantly, the charisma of some of the leaders. I mean, they were lucky enough to be 11 brothers, and by statistics, among 11 people, a couple would be better than others. So but it has to do with them being not the original Ndrangheta in a way. So they are kind of newcomers who gain their spot, but they might not play by the same rules. So, but that's again, analytical speculation.
No, but it's incredibly interesting. Like, seems here that, you know, there are several factors coming in. Of course, family links as a good, you know, structure on which to build like a criminal enterprise. Different, you know, types of mafia families inside the Ndrangheta, the new.
And I think this is the thing that gets forgotten, because we tend to simplify and talk about the Ndrangheta as a unique thing. But the best way to look at them is actually to look at them as families, and actual families. I wrote one of my latest articles, which is supposed to build a project, is about Ndrangheta dynasties, because these are dynasties in a business sense. And we know from the literature on business and dynasties and family dynasties that these family businesses suffer a lot from the so-called family factors. If you have a stupid child, and it's a problem for the business. If your child is shy while you are the most charismatic man, it's a problem for the business. So if your child is gay, it's a problem for the maintaining of certain rules. So you have all sorts of problems, and they all come up to affect the criminal family.
I can only imagine the pressure each of them are on, like, all the time. And I guess this is another of those parallels between, let's say, legitimate economic enterprises and you know, illegitimate criminal enterprises. And I guess just making lots of babies can help in this case. So take notes, mafiosi.
Yeah, indeed.
Make lots of babies and everything will be. I wanted to go back to perhaps the bigger picture that you were mentioning. So the maxi-trial, Rinascita Scott, and the other processes that you mentioned, the other trials that you mentioned. Because if I'm not mistaken, there is a bigger picture that comes out of here, especially with regard to, again, the levels. So the context between the underworld and the so-called underworld and the so-called upperworld, which is something that happened, that was very much under the scope of the prosecutors in Rome as well. When a few years ago, I know you've written a couple of articles about the alleged
Mafia Capitale. Yeah.
Exactly. So what comes out of this picture? And you also mentioned like someone from Forza Italia, which we remind the audience is Berlusconi's party, who is prosecuted right now in Rinascita Scott. So what picture comes out of the contacts between underworld and upperworld in these recent years of processes?
I think it's always a problem of density. So the density of the Calabrian political scene is really, really problematic. There are always the same people changing sofas in a way. So you see the same names over and over again. So the density is really, really tight. It's really difficult to enter as a new political actor. So this produces some sort of stagnation, which eventually, because of a number of reasons that have to do with who are the only credible economic actors in the region, on one side, mafia could be one of them, and on the other side, how do I get votes in the very tiny town that I have never heard of, but I need their votes because otherwise I can't proceed to the regional elections? How do I do that? Mafia power. So there is a combination of factors there that makes the stagnation even more reliant on personal connections. And personal connections, especially in certain areas, includes mafia connections. So the relationship is mutual and is beneficial both ways. So we see, for example, going back to Rinascita Scott, as I said, Rinascita Scott follows in, or is one piece of the puzzle of other trials. So, and I'll stay with the figure of Luigi Mancuso, as I said, because he's the main guy in Rinascita Scott. And he's the one that his nephew is about to screw over. So Luigi, as I said, is 66-year-old, and we find him in 3 different trials in the same week, last January, for different reasons. So in Rinascita Scott is wanted number 1, okay? He's the big mafia boss. He wanted to create this sort of unification of clans. He wanted to be the bigger boss of the province. Great. Everyone loves him. So he's one of the most charismatic mafia figure that you can imagine. He wants peace and order. He doesn't want violence, allegedly. He wants everyone to get along. He wants to be recognized as the peacemaker, okay? He's a really charismatic man for reasons that go beyond my comprehension, because I remember the guy from when I was little and I can't really actually figure it out. He's known, yeah, but that's another story. That's another story. We'll get to that story. So in his village, which is the reason why I remember him as I was little, because it's my father's village. In his village, he's known as the Supreme, the Saint, kind of like these big names, right? But he went to prison in 1993 and came back in 2012, okay? He comes back and all of a sudden he's within Rinascita Scott, obviously down the line. He's mentioned in his best friend, let's say in the white collar circle, with this parliamentary guy, ex-former parliamentarian guy from Forza Italia, who is kind of an important figure in Calabria in terms of regional politics. He's also mentioned, so their relationship, let's say, so the relationship between this Vitelli guy, that's his surname, and Mancuso is mentioned in Operation and Trial for Gotha, which is a trial in Reggio Calabria, which is the trial against the invisible people of the Ndrangheta, the one who take the plane. And then there is essentially his relationship are like a kind of is like a spider with a network of other spiders around him that kind of get activated when there is need to. So he has some sort of instrumental friendships, which are genuine friendships. So they actually go and have lunch and laugh and have, you know, kind of the usual kind of thing. They've known each other for years, like decades, even if he was in prison until 2012, right? So there is this kind of continuity of the territory, which is kind of part of the promise of the mafia to offer continuity in a land like Calabria, which is constantly shaken up by political change, by, you know, inadequacy of the political class. So Mancuso offers this continuity. And you see him and in another trial as well, mentioned in another trial, which is the trial for Ndrangheta Stragista, which is a trial, a very important trial, currently ongoing in Reggio Calabria as well, which relates to his activities, well, to the activities of the Ndrangheta more generally in the 90s. And he's mentioned even there. And he was barely 40 at the time. His clan was kind of like not even a clan back then, was very much relying on his figure. And he was already offering his services as guardian of the land and kind of becoming this figure of reference for the Sicilians who wanted the help of the Calabrians to carry out the terrorist attacks, the mafia-like terrorist attacks. So Mancuso was already then at the time. So you see his figures and kind of like place him in different trials and say, okay, so in Rinascita Scott is the big guy who has money, God knows where, from cocaine, is heading this big kind of core consortium of clans, and is recognized as the supreme. There is an entrepreneur who talks about him and says, Luigi as the roof of the world, is the roof of the world. Everything is below him, right? So he has this kind of name. But then on the other side, you see his people, his friends, so his network mentioned in Operation Gotha, in the trial of Gotha, which says that this parliamentary guy was part of a bigger picture where former Masons, actual Masons, politicians, lawyers, all the elite of the city of Reggio Calabria and Catanzaro, which are the two main cities of Calabria, kind of came together to sort of arrange privileged exchange of information and favors. And then obviously you see him mentioned as a wannabe kind of terrorist-like mafia man for Cosa Nostra. So this is how you kind of place it together, and you have to zoom out of the little place, of the little village, because in the little village, you can see this split. You can see the mafia from below, which is actually a good mafia for the people sometimes. He's the one who gets you a job in 3.5 seconds, right? The usual mafia myth. He's the one who makes sure that only companies who are based in the village can do work in the village. Why are you coming from outside the village to do a well in here? Who the hell are you? We do things in-house, right? So he keeps work for people. But then on the other side, he has all these friends and, you know, kind of networks that attach him to the plane and not to the train. They attach him to this kind of real power of the Ndrangheta, which is where the Ndrangheta is a unified entity that doesn't really care about what happens in the little places and kind of goes with the bigger slice of power. So it's a really complicated mechanism, but it can be understood when you really zoom out and look at all the complexity of the region, which a lot, as I said, has to do with the very, very difficulty of politics to regenerate. It's like, I mean, there are now the elections in Calabria and you just want to kill yourself. And, you know, it's like trying to figure out how the hell are we going to go to regional elections.
There is a lot of continuity and dynasties in politics as well. Okay, this is really interesting, because it seems to me from what you say that the same person who is the saint, the supreme, the roof of the world for some people, perhaps the people from his village, or even entrepreneurs that he enables, to conduct business and make money. To them, he's the supreme. But then, if you look from above, he seems to be just a part of a larger scheme, and he gets
It's a big part. It's a big part, but is definitely part of a larger spider web. So he has his own spider web, but then he's also a spider in a larger spider web. So I think but that's the real Ndrangheta in a way. This ability to maintain different parallel levels at the same time, that not necessarily mix. And I think now we are at a very interesting point in time, because right now prosecutors from Reggio and from Catanzaro are kind of going in the same direction. So they're starting to draw circles rather than just lines parallel to one another. So finally we start seeing some circularity, but there are so many questions about the history of these clans, of many of these clans, and that it's just too much work for anyone really, including the prosecutors.
Hopefully by cooperating, they will be able to.
No, I mean, I think it's a very interesting time. If there is a time to actually try and, I wouldn't say defeat, because it's a bit of an impossible aim to defeat the mafia. But I think it definitely to try and at least understand, because for many years we're just like reading one thing one day and the next day, this kind of contradicts it all. So,
sure.
So at least now we sort of have some coordinates.
Wow. Okay. Well, at least it's good news for people like you who are actually.
Yeah, well, I will never see the end of it. So
No.
my life is actually reading documents at this stage.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the process on the Ndrangheta stragista, so the role
Yes.
of the Ndrangheta in the confrontation during the 90s between the Sicilian Mafia and the Italian state. What was the business of the Ndrangheta of getting involved in all of that from what we
That's a
see in the process?
That's a very good question. So a lot of that has to do with another chapter of the 'Ndrangheta history, which is the city of Reggio Calabria. The city of Reggio Calabria, which is kind of like kind of like an open secret, like everyone kind of knows, but it's still not talked about. So what happens in Reggio Calabria is kind of like so it's the switch from the 'Ndrangheta that everyone kind of knew in the villages to the city 'Ndrangheta. So the city 'Ndrangheta is yet another type of 'Ndrangheta in a way, because obviously it handles a different territory. So the control of the territory cannot be the same, because of course you are looking at, Reggio Calabria is not a big city, it's 230,000 people, but for Calabria is quite big. So, and obviously one thing is to control 3,000 people, one thing is to control 230,000. So with this city 'Ndrangheta clans, you have a whole other side to the 'Ndrangheta evolution. So everything that happens, so the city of Reggio Calabria is like a chapter on itself. And it has to do with local governance. So the way the city has been governed for the past 40 years is a mix between particularistic networks, again, the same people talking forever among each other for 30 years, from very kind of shady administrators. The governor of Calabria, the former governor of Calabria, another Forza Italia member, they seem to have a preference for Forza Italia, God knows why, but he's been in prison for 4 years, I think, at least. Is now writing a book about his experience, if you are interested. So Giuseppe Scopelliti has been one of the most problematic mayor of Reggio Calabria, then governor of Calabria. So there is this kind of connections between what happens in politics in region, what happens in politics in the region. So they kind of define the regional politics because it's the biggest city. So that on one side. So there is, again, a density of players, people who wear different hats, who are lawyers, but they are also part of the local Freemasons, who happen to have secret chambers. Okay, so as in case you couldn't have more problems, even the secret chambers of the Freemasons. Then you have entrepreneurs and kind of like the elite. They call it the Reggio Bene, the Reggio elite, right? Which is this sort of very old-fashioned dynasties, families, who have been around for centuries, who kind of are the upper class. And in this upper class, some of these upper class families are also mafia families. So you have a situation in Reggio Calabria, which eventually made them in the 90s the preferred partners. So the people that Cosa Nostra reached out to because of their power in the institutions. The power in the institutions ranging from mayors to the local councils, to any type of contract, subcontract that you could have of public works, which is the very big pot of money there, including health, including infrastructures, including everything else. Plus, eventually, even the local extortion rackets, which kind of feeds into that, which is done through district, of course, because everyone, they kind of had to come to a conclusion. So Reggio Calabria power structure of including the mafia made the mafia families, how can I put it, more, they're kind of, yeah, the elite of the mafia families. They are the smartest one in a way. They are the one that do the most interesting financial money laundering kind of type. They are the ones who launder their money through gambling online before gambling online was even a thing. So they are a little bit more tuned in to the economic side of the story. And that's why they became the partners for some of the Cosa Nostra people. In this specific case, the boss of Brancaccio, Graviano, who was in very good relationship with the family of De Stefano, the De Stefano family, which is one of the most important families of the 'Ndrangheta till today, undisputed family of Reggio Calabria, still today. And they kind of are, the elite. So between De Stefano, who at the time were also heading the 'Ndrangheta overall, so they were the person of reference for the 'Ndrangheta overall. Again, it's made of very charismatic men. Together with this kind of group of people who were kind of here and there, including Mancuso at some point, they sort of had to make a choice. Are we siding with this strategy of Cosa Nostra? Do we help Cosa Nostra do what they're planning to do, which is to act as a insurrectional force and attack the state with different ways, or we don't? So a majority of the 'Ndrangheta didn't want to, and they effectively did not join, because the 'Ndrangheta clans tends to have a low profile. They want to keep a low profile. This is really not a low profile. And by the way, at the time, they weren't that strong in terms of money. But some clans, including some important ones, like the one in Reggio, decided, yes, let's do it. So at this moment, 'Ndrangheta Stragista, so this trial, is about this side of the 'Ndrangheta, which helped Cosa Nostra carry out some of the attacks. And carried out some of the attacks in Calabria as well, which at the time were not read as part of the overall picture. So they started killing carabinieri, for example, or police people. And no one thought, it's like, oh, why the hell are they doing that? No one thought that there was a bigger picture, but now we know that there is. So it's like, again, piecing together pieces of the puzzle. So nothing new under the sun, apart from the umbrella, which kind of tells us a different story. And it tells us a story which kind of rewrites the Italian story, because it tells us not only that Cosa Nostra was helped by the 'Ndrangheta, and that the 'Ndrangheta was considered at the same level of Cosa Nostra already in some families, which kind of contradicts years and years and years of us telling, oh no, the 'Ndrangheta was the minor, blah, 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 blah. But also the history about the 'Ndrangheta penetration in politics, the institution, is completely rewritten, including Forza Italia, including the story that we already know from the other trial in Sicily about the negotiation, the trattativa between the state and Cosa Nostra, which happened at the time in Palermo, has been over for a few years. That trial told us about the role of Silvio Berlusconi and the role of Forza Italia in the bigger picture. Now we know that there is a role of Forza Italia and Berlusconi and Calabria as well. So that explains some of the things that happened later that we couldn't quite figure out, including this special bond between Forza Italia and the 'Ndrangheta. So it kind of is rewriting a lot. And obviously, again, it's very complicated and very local, but it speaks about why the mafia violence stopped, why the structure of the 'Ndrangheta in Reggio is so different from everything else, why there is a difference between the urban mafia and the local and the rural mafia. So there is so much about that we'll need to unpack for years and years and years and years to come.
Providing you and your colleagues lots and lots and lots.
I want to do something else. I can't I mean, seriously, sometimes I start seeing things. I know these people by heart now. So I guess let me do something.
That's not a good thing necessarily.
Actually, I know, right?
Very likely not a good thing. Look, this was a great answer, and actually covers a question I wanted to ask you about, the urban side of the 'Ndrangheta respect with the rural side. I guess my last question for this interview is going to be really perhaps by going to an even bigger picture. Do we see the 'Ndrangheta engaging in the same kind of activities in other cities they're present in, I don't know, Canada, Australia, as they do in their homeland, of Calabria, so Reggio Calabria, etc., or do they change their activities and their methods a little bit?
I think my answer here will be depends on which 'Ndrangheta. Again, depends on which clan. So in Calabria, obviously, relationships are very they are negotiated on a different level. So they are negotiated on a much smaller scale in a way. And kind of everyone knows who everyone is, and you negotiate your power in a different way, including your activities. The Ndrangheta clans are, as I said, bottom up, meaning that at the bottom level, everyone does whatever they want. There is no structure from above saying, oh, you do this, you do that. No. So that remains abroad. Abroad, the relationship are family to family, clan to clan. They don't go around this bigger structure of the Ndrangheta, which there is, but it's not activated unless there is some random reason for activating it, some problem, something goes wrong, whatever. So the relationship is family in Calabria talks to family in Toronto or in Melbourne, and they, depending on what the family does, overall, they'll do similar things. So mostly drugs, of course, that's the usual evergreen, but especially in non-proximity non-proximity territories like Australia and Canada, so very far away lands where the history of the mobility of the Ndrangheta merges in the history of the mobility of Calabrians. So it's one and the same in many ways. Then you see peculiar things. So in some ways they are the same, but it's like they took a different route. So it's like the Ndrangheta moved in, the clan moved in 1954, right? So up to 1954, they keep certain rules. So I see, for example, in Australia, certain things that are attributed to the Ndrangheta, which are actually not applicable to Calabria anymore, but they were in 1954. So they kind of crystallized certain rules, norms, and behaviors. And then they took a 2.0 version, which is the Australian version, which has to adapt to Australian territory. And obviously entered in different businesses, entered in different kind of mechanism, including ethnic politics, which is a massive thing in Australia or in Canada, because clearly you are talking about Australia, more than 1 million people, over 23 million people have Italian origins. So we are talking about a massive amount of people. And within this amount of people, Calabrians are the majority. So we're still influencing different things. So you see them in the chambers of commerce, you see them interested in the Italian Cultural Center, you see them interested in all sorts of things that speak ethnic. And that's the most fascinating thing. But also they are kind of good old mafia people. So especially at the very beginning of their settlement abroad, they were very violent, which kind of speaks to their necessity to reaffirm territorial sovereignty. So very famous for people who are into this kind of things, the gangland murders of Melbourne, which were a decade of murders in the Victoria Market, heavily linked to the Ndrangheta, but not just to the Ndrangheta, they were linked to the very Calabrian faction of the Ndrangheta, very old style, Aspromonte region Ndrangheta, and the new Italian mafia in Melbourne, which were people from various places in Italy who kind of couldn't give a damn about the Ndrangheta, but they were still Italian, so there was some problem there, so some territorial overlap. So similarly now in Toronto, you see violence now as well, because they are bringing the tension from Calabria into Toronto in a situation where the Italian mafia overall, whatever Italian mafia means in Ontario, is kind of still deciding which way to go. Do we remain Italian mafia vaguely, or do we keep the brand of the Ndrangheta and therefore we operate under their umbrella? And so there have been a couple of very gruesome murders as well, one of which was last July, of a very important mafia boss of Hamilton, who God knows who killed him. People say they killed him from Siderno in Calabria. So it was a very kind of, mob stories all around. So they tend to keep the behaviors. Behavior being, I have a reputation, my reputation is my key thing. That reputation has to be maintained even through violence if there needs to be, but violence is the last resort, because violence is not a good thing, because everyone looks at us. And more importantly, I want to clean my reputation. I want to look powerful, respected, and socially accepted. So the behavior of the 'Ndrangheta, like any mafia, is that. So it can strike different chords in a way. But apart from, so in that sense, Australia and Canada are more interesting because they have very old settlements of the 'Ndrangheta, and especially Australia has only had the 'Ndrangheta ever. In terms of Italian mafia imported from Italy, never had Cosa Nostra, nothing like that. Europe instead is a lot more boring. Drugs, pizzerias, ice cream shop, drugs, pizzerias, ice cream shop. So really boring. But yeah, but that's because they are very close to Italy. So in a way, they don't need to kind of negotiate much with local partners. So I don't know if that was the answer you want.
Absolutely. It's I guess there's a lot for our audience to unpack between the different the importance of family links, but also the single stories of migration to different countries. Of course, the specific country and urban environment, the role of violence. They seem to be pretty mindful about that. And I just
now they seem to be, but the 'Ndrangheta built its reputation on violence in the 70s, 80s. So let's not forget that. I mean, there is as a final comment, if I may, there is I theorized this in a book that is yet to be published. I'm currently finishing it up. There is an echo of violence that the 'Ndrangheta carries and banks on. Everyone remembers how violent they are, at least in Calabria. So no one messes with them. So there is this echo of violence is more violent than actual violence in a way, because it traumatizes over and over and over again. But that's a different story, I guess, for another
but a very striking story, I guess. Like, I really look forward to the book is coming out.
Yeah, me too. If I ever get out of this.
Oh, I hope so, of course. And on this note, so the mix of goods that Ndrangheta provides: ice creams, pizza, drugs, and violence. On this note, I think we can end the interview. Thank you so much, Anna, for
Thank you.
Debate, because this has been very, I guess the audience is loving this interview.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And just to conclude, so thanks again to Anna. To the audience, please, if you like this video, of course, like and share, and please check us out here on YouTube on our channel, and we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it, we're there. So look for us out there, and we'll see you next time with the next episode of Straight Talk.